Pope Francis, on the verge of death, made an unexpected request to see Figo, his faithful secret dog rescued from the streets of Buenos Aires. When the golden mixed breed entered the room, something inexplicable happened. The patient's vital signs stabilized, shocking the doctors present. A story of unconditional love that transformed the Vatican and inspired millions worldwide. A journey of faith, compassion, and the healing power of a four-legged friend. Get ready for an emotional journey. Imagine a day like any other in the majestic corridors of the Vatican. The Italian afternoon sun streamed through the centuries-old windows, creating golden patterns on the marble floors as cardinals hurried, their red robes swirling like autumn leaves in the wind. But this was no ordinary day. In the heart of that sacred place, a silent drama was unfolding, hidden from the eyes of the world. Pope Francis, the man who had won hearts worldwide with his humility and compassion, lay in his bed, his pale face contrasting with the white sheets. Doctors moved around him with grave expressions, exchanging worried glances as monitors beeped at an unsettling rhythm. The life of the leader of over 1 billion faithful hung by a thread as delicate as it was invisible. "His vitals are unstable," whispered one of the doctors to the Cardinal Secretary of State, who stood at the door like a sentinel. "I fear we are losing him." It was at this critical moment, when death seemed to extend its invisible hands, that Pope Francis, with a voice as fragile as a dry leaf, made a request that would shake the centuries-old structures of that place. "Please, bring Figo to me. I need to say goodbye to my friend." The cardinal's eyes widened in surprise. "Figo? Who is Figo, Holy Father?" A small group of people knew the answer to that question. Among them was Sister Mary Catherine, a Brazilian nun, with calloused hands and an easy smile, who worked in the Vatican kitchen. When the request reached her ears, she showed no surprise, only nodded with determination. "I will get Figo immediately." As she hurried through the corridors towards a small hidden garden at the back of the papal complex, Sister Mary Catherine's mind wandered back 8 years. She remembered the day the then newly elected Pope Francis returned from a secret visit to a poor neighborhood in Buenos Aires, his beloved hometown. That day, he carried in his arms a mixed-breed puppy, thin and trembling, with golden fur, and eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the world. "He followed me for miles," the Pope had explained, in his characteristic Argentine accent. "I tried to gently shoo him away several times, but he refused to give up on me." How could I give up on him? Figo, as he was named, became a well-kept secret within the Vatican walls. Sister Mary Catherine took responsibility for his daily care, creating a discreet space for him in that little-used garden. Every night when the corridors of the Apostolic Palace were silent, she would take the dog for private visits to the Pope's apartments. Now, 8 years later, Figo had grown into a medium-sized adult dog, still with that golden fur that shone in the sun like a canine halo. When the nun approached the garden, he came running towards her, tail wagging with that pure joy only animals can show. But something in his canine gaze seemed different today. It was as if, in some mysterious way, he knew something important was happening. "Come on, Figo," the sister said softly, attaching an improvised leash to his collar. "Someone very special needs you very much right now." As they walked back through the corridors, they drew perplexed stares from staff and clergy. A dog in the Vatican? And worse, heading towards the papal apartments? The scandal was palpable, almost visible in the air like a mist of indignation. But Sister Mary Catherine pressed on, her chin held high in silent determination. Some things were more important than protocols and traditions. In the Pope's room, the tension was thick as fog. The doctors had tried everything, and now stood back respectfully, giving the leader of the Catholic Church his last moments of privacy. It was in this scene of silent farewell that the door opened, and Figo entered, pulling anxiously on the leash. What happened next would leave even the most skeptical perplexed. Upon seeing his owner, Figo let out a soft whimper, almost human, in its emotion. With a tug, he freed himself from the leash and jumped onto the bed, ignoring the shocked protests of the cardinals present. He gently approached the Pope's pale face and began to lick his cheeks with the gentlest of caresses. "Figo, my faithful friend," the Pope whispered, his voice gaining momentary strength as his frail hands stroked the golden fur. "You came." The doctors prepared to remove the animal, citing concerns about hygiene and the patient's delicate state, when something inexplicable began to happen. The monitors recording the Pope's vital signs began to show changes. His blood pressure, which had been dangerously low, began to stabilize. His heart rate, previously erratic, found a stronger, steadier rhythm. "It's impossible," the chief doctor murmured, adjusting his glasses to be sure of what he was seeing. "The vitals are improving." The Cardinal Secretary of State, a traditionalist man named Lawrence who had always regarded any deviation from protocol with suspicion, watched the scene with a mixture of shock and disbelief. How could a mere animal have such an effect? Was it coincidence or something more? The following hours seemed suspended in time. Figo remained lying beside the Pope, like a furry guardian between him and the world. No one dared remove him, not after what they had witnessed. And gradually, the impossible continued to happen. Pope Francis began to show signs of improvement. News of his astonishing recovery spread quickly through the Vatican corridors, but the secret about the dog remained well kept among the small circle who had witnessed the miracle. 3 months passed. 3 months of slow but steady recovery. 3 months during which Figo became a permanent presence by the Pope's side, sleeping on the rug beside his bed, accompanying him on his increasingly longer walks through the private gardens. It was during one of these walks on a crisp spring morning that Pope Francis made a declaration that would shake the conservative structures of the Church. "It's time for the world to know Figo," he said to Sister Mary Catherine, who accompanied them, as always. "I can no longer hide this part of my life. He is not just a pet. He is a living lesson in fidelity, unconditional love, and healing that God has placed in my path." News of Figo's existence and his role in the Pope's miraculous recovery dropped like a bomb in religious circles. The Vatican was flooded with requests for interviews and information. Social media exploded with divided opinions. Some saw the story as a beautiful symbol of compassion and simplicity, values that Jesus himself preached. Others considered the situation scandalous and improper for a religious leader of the Pope's magnitude. Cardinal Lawrence led the faction of traditionalists opposed to Figo's public exposure. In a private meeting with the Pope, he did not hide his concern. "Holy Father, with all due respect, this dog story is creating an unnecessary distraction. There are far more important theological and humanitarian issues for the Church to address." "A pet? What will the faithful think?" Pope Francis, seated in his armchair with Figo at his feet, listened patiently. His eyes, now recovered from the veil of illness, shone with that peculiar mixture of kindness and determination that had become his trademark. "Cardinal Lawrence," he finally replied, "for years I questioned whether I had the right to keep something as personal as a pet, given my position. Now I understand that this doubt came from fear, not faith. What will the faithful think? I hope they will think their Pope is human, that he understands loneliness, that he values loyal companionship, that he sees God in the simplest and purest of creatures." He paused, stroking Figo's head, who had looked up as if understanding every word. "More importantly, I hope they will see that love comes in many forms, and all of them are sacred." The cardinal left that meeting without having achieved what he wished, but with a seed of reflection planted in his heart. Could there be wisdom in that simplicity he considered scandalous? Meanwhile, Figo's story was taking on almost mythical contours in the popular imagination. Letters and gifts for the dog arrived by the thousands. Children sent drawings depicting the miracle dog. The elderly wrote sharing stories about how their own pets had been a source of comfort and healing in difficult times. The Pope, always sensitive to the pulse of the world outside the Vatican walls, realized he had touched something deep in the collective soul, something that transcended religious and cultural divisions. The connection between humans and animals, that primitive and sacred bond that had been neglected in an increasingly technological and isolated world. Figo's first public appearance was carefully planned, a general audience in St. Peter's Square. With a limited number of faithful for security reasons, Pope Francis appeared in his traditional Pope-mobile, but with an unusual addition. Figo sitting patiently beside him, wearing a small white and yellow bandana, the Vatican colors, around his neck. The crowd reacted with collective gasps, applause, and some tears. Cameras from around the world captured the historic moment when a pontiff officially presented a pet as part of his life. It was during this same audience that the first of the events many would call Figo's miracles occurred. Suddenly, without any warning, the dog jumped from the Pope-mobile and ran directly into the crowd, ignoring the alarmed shouts of the security guards. Before they could reach him, Figo had already reached a woman who stood quietly in a corner, apart from the others. She was a solitary figure dressed in black with eyes that seemed empty of light. Figo sat down before her and placed his paw on her knee, looking deeply into her eyes. The woman, visibly shocked, fell to her knees and began to cry, hugging the dog as sobs shook her body. Later, it was discovered that this woman, Teresa Peterson, a 70-year-old widow from Madrid, had traveled to Rome with a terrible decision. In mind, after the papal audience, she planned to take her own life, devastated by the recent loss of her husband and son in a car accident. In her own words, reported later to the press, "When that dog looked into my eyes, it was as if he could see all my pain. And somehow, those eyes told me, it's not time. You still have so much love to give and receive." This incident completely transformed the narrative surrounding Figo. From a potentially scandalous curiosity, he became a symbol of hope and spiritual intuition. Similar stories began to emerge. In every public appearance, Figo seemed invariably to find the person most in need of comfort, as if he possessed an internal radar for human suffering. Pope Francis, deeply touched by these events, began to develop the idea of what would later be called the Figo Initiative, an innovative program that would bring animal-assisted therapy to Catholic hospitals worldwide, starting with the most vulnerable: children with cancer, the elderly, with dementia, people in palliative care. Animals, he explained in one of his weekly audiences, often teach us what we forget: how to be present in the moment, how to love without judgment, how to forgive without resentment. They are silent, teachers of divine grace. These words sparked a silent revolution in the way the Church began to approach the relationship between humans and animals. Theological seminaries initiated debates on the position of animals in divine creation. Parishes began organizing blessings for pets, revitalizing the tradition of St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals. But it wasn't all smooth sailing for Figo and Pope Francis. When the dog turned 11, 3 years after the event that nearly took his owner's life, came the second great test of faith for the pontiff. Figo began showing signs of lethargy and loss of appetite. Tests, discreetly performed by veterinarians, brought to the Vatican revealed the hard truth: advanced kidney disease. Without specialized treatment, the prognosis was only a few weeks of life. The best available treatment was in the United States, a veterinary clinic in Boston that was developing an experimental procedure for cases like Figo's. The decision to take the dog there was not made lightly. The Pope had important diplomatic engagements scheduled, including a meeting with world leaders to discuss the climate crisis, a central theme of his pontificate. "I must cancel my participation in the summit," he announced, to the surprise of his advisors. "Figo needs me now, just as I needed him when I was on the verge of death." News of the cancellation caused an unprecedented media and institutional storm. "Pope abandons world leaders. For sick dog," screamed the most sensational headlines. Even within the Vatican, voices were raised questioning the prudence of the decision. Cardinal Lawrence, who had until then moderated his opposition to the Figo issue, now saw his golden opportunity to reverse what he considered a distortion of papal priorities. "Holy Father," he argued in a tense meeting, "I understand your attachment to the animal, but we are talking about issues that affect the future of humanity. Millions of people depend on your moral leadership in these discussions. How can you justify abandoning all this for Forgive my frankness on a dog." Pope Francis remained silent for long moments after hearing these words. His face, marked by time and the world's worries, revealed a deep sadness, but also an unwavering certainty. "Cardinal Lawrence," he finally replied, "for centuries the Church has preached about compassion, but often we have practiced it selectively. We say that all life is sacred, but we establish hierarchies of which lives deserve our attention and care. If I cannot be faithful to a creature who has shown absolute fidelity to me, how can I ask the world to trust my words about faithfulness to God and neighbor?" He walked to the window, looking out at the Vatican gardens bathed in the golden light of the Roman evening. Furthermore, perhaps there is a greater lesson to be taught here. The world is sick precisely because we have forgotten how to care for the most vulnerable creatures, whether human or not. Perhaps my absence from the summit will say more about our priorities than my presence ever would. The trip to Boston was kept in relative secrecy, but it was impossible to completely hide the Pope's presence on American soil. While Figo received his treatment, the pontiff stayed in a simple parish house, away from the usual spotlights and protocols. It was during this period of voluntary exile that some of the most transformative encounters of his pontificate occurred. Free from the formalities and oppressive security that usually surrounded him, he was able to interact with ordinary people in ways that would be impossible under other circumstances. There was the encounter with Judith, a 90-year-old Jewish woman who came to the veterinary clinic every day to visit her elderly cat. Without recognizing the Pope in his simple civilian clothes, she shared with him stories about how her cat had helped her survive depression after losing her entire family in the Holocaust. "Some call him just an animal," she said. "But for me, he is an angel with fur, sent to remind me that there are still reasons to keep going." There was the young atheist veterinarian Dr. Marcus, who initially treated Figo without knowing who his owner was. When he finally found out, he confessed to the Pope, "I grew up rejecting the Church because I saw it as an institution disconnected from reality. But seeing a religious leader cross oceans for a mixed-breed dog, that makes me reconsider a lot of my certainties." Each of these encounters was like a small seed planted in the Pope's heart, seeds that would later blossom in his homilies and writings into a new understanding of spirituality that included all of God's creatures. After 3 weeks of intensive treatment, Figo showed signs of significant improvement. The doctors were optimistic. With proper care, he could live comfortably for a few more years. The news was received with tears of joy by the pontiff. The return to Rome was very different from the departure, where before there had been criticism and doubt. Now there were crowds welcoming the Pope and his faithful companion with signs, flowers, and even puppies held up for the papal blessing. The story of love and loyalty between the man and the animal had touched a universal nerve, transcending religious and cultural boundaries. At the Vatican, a visibly transformed Cardinal Lawrence awaited. During the Pope's absence, something unexpected had happened to the rigid traditionalist. After losing an important internal political dispute and being publicly humiliated by his opponents, the Cardinal had fallen into a deep depression. It was during this dark period that, wandering alone through the Vatican gardens, he found a small object left behind, Figo's favorite tennis ball. Holding that simple object, a symbol of so many hours of play and pure joy, something broke inside the Cardinal's hardened heart. The tears came first, tears held back by decades of rigor and self-importance. Then came an understanding that shook him to his core. His entire life had been dedicated to rules, protocols, and hierarchies, while the true core of the Christian message, unconditional love, had completely escaped him. When Pope Francis returned, he found a different Cardinal Lawrence awaiting him, more humble, more reflective, more human. And when Figo, recognizing the man who had so often rejected him, approached him and gently placed his head on his knee, the last wall within the Cardinal's heart crumbled. "Holy Father," he confessed with a choked voice, "I spent my life judging what I didn't understand. Forgive me." The Pope smiled that gentle smile that had become his trademark. "There is nothing to forgive, Lawrence. Sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely to finally find ourselves." The following months witnessed revolutionary changes in the Catholic Church's approach to animals and the environment. Inspired by his experiences, Pope Francis wrote a historic encyclical titled Fidelitas Creaturae, Fidelity of Creatures, which significantly expanded Catholic teachings on human responsibility towards all forms of life. The Vatican gardens were opened once a month for a Figo Adoption Day, where abandoned animals found new homes with carefully selected families. Parishes worldwide began incorporating animal blessings as a regular part of their activities, revitalizing the connection to the legacy of St. Francis of Assisi. The Figo initiative grew exponentially, bringing animal-assisted therapy to Catholic hospitals in over 70 countries. Studies began documenting the positive effects of these interventions. Patients who regularly interacted with therapy animals showed faster recovery, less need for pain medication, and better quality of life. Thus, a development that surprised even the most optimistic animal shelters near Catholic churches, reported a significant increase in adoption rates. Families often cited Figo's story as the inspiration for their decision to adopt a rescue animal. Meanwhile, the relationship between Pope Francis and Figo continued to deepen. On quiet afternoons, it was common to see them walking together through the gardens. An elderly man in white robes and a golden-furred dog now sprinkled with gray, both moving at a slower pace, but with the serene joy that comes from true companionship. It was during one of these strolls, on a glorious autumn evening, that the Pope shared a reflection with Sister Mary Catherine that would later be inscribed in stone at the entrance of the Vatican's first official veterinary hospital. For 8 years, I questioned whether it was appropriate for a pope to have a pet. Now I realize the question was wrong from the start. Figo was never my pet. We are journey companions, souls connected by something that transcends human words. Perhaps this is what God desires for all his creatures, not dominion, but partnership. Not ownership, but companionship. When Figo turned 12, a miracle in itself considering his condition, the Pope made a decision that shocked the religious world. In a solemn ceremony, he appeared at a general audience with Figo sitting patiently beside him, symbolizing a new era of compassion and inclusion in the Church. "The way we treat God's most vulnerable creatures," he declared to a packed St. Peter's Square, "reflects how we treat God himself. For too long we have ignored the silent suffering of our brothers and sisters of 4 legs, feathers, and scales. Today, I reaffirm this Church's commitment to the protection and celebration of all creatures who share with us this miracle called life." Images of this moment circulated worldwide, inspiring countless acts of kindness. Animal shelters reported unprecedented waves of adoptions and donations. Legislators in various countries cited the papal example when proposing stricter laws against animal cruelty. What had begun as an almost scandalous secret, a pope with a mixed-breed dog, had transformed into one of the most enduring and beloved legacies of his pontificate. Through Figo, Pope Francis had reminded the world of a simple but profound truth, that sometimes we find the most important lessons about the divine not in complex theological treatises, but in the trusting gaze of an animal who loves unconditionally. In the following years, when distinguished visitors came to the Vatican, it wasn't uncommon to find Figo present during important audiences. Heads of state, religious dignitaries, and celebrities were all welcomed not only by the Pope, but also by his faithful canine companion, who seemed to possess a special talent for breaking tensions and creating atmospheres of genuine dialogue. On one memorable occasion, during particularly tense negotiations between leaders of nations in conflict, it was Figo who, by lying down exactly on the dividing line between the two opposing groups, sparked the first shared smile and paved the way for a more human dialogue. Cardinal Lawrence, completely transformed by his experience, became the most fervent advocate for the Figo initiative. As the Pope advanced in age, Lawrence took on many of the practical responsibilities of the program, traveling tirelessly to inaugurate new initiatives and build bridges between animal welfare groups and religious institutions. "It's ironic," he confessed during an interview, I spent half my life trying to keep animals out of the church, and now I dedicate the rest of it to ensuring they are never excluded again. The story of Figo and Pope Francis inspired artists around the world. Paintings, sculptures, films, and books explored this unique relationship that had transformed not only an institution, but also the way millions of people viewed their own relationship with animals. A particularly talented painter, Sofia Montenegro, created a gigantic mural that was installed in the pediatric wing of Gemelli Hospital in Rome. The work showed the Pope and Figo walking together through a field of wildflowers, with children and animals of all species following them in harmony. Below, in golden letters, were the words, "Love knows no species." As Figo aged, his walks with the Pope became shorter, his naps longer, but the connection between them seemed only to deepen. Witnesses reported moments of almost supernatural communication between the man and the animal, as if they shared a language that transcended words. In one of these moments, captured on video by a photographer documenting daily life at the Vatican for a historical project, the Pope and Figo are seen sitting side by side in the garden, watching the sunset. Without any visible command, Figo suddenly placed his paw on the Pope's hand. At the exact moment, a solitary tear rolled down the pontiff's face. The Pope looked at his faithful friend and smiled, the kind of smile that comes from an understanding beyond words. This brief video, when leaked online, became one of the most shared in social media history. Even people with no religious affiliation reported being deeply touched by that silent demonstration of interspecies connection. In theological circles, a new current of thought began to emerge, exploring what they called the theology of universal compassion, the idea that the divine mission of care extends to all sentient creatures. Catholic seminaries began including modules on animal ethics and environmental responsibility as central components of priestly formation, not as peripheral topics. When Figo finally passed away, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 15, remarkably, long lived for a dog of his size, the entire world seemed to pause to mourn his passing. Pope Francis, then over 90 years old and visibly frail, insisted on personally conducting a special ceremony in the Vatican gardens. Figo was not just a dog, he declared with a choked but firm voice. He was a teacher of loyalty, when the world values convenience, a teacher of full presence when the world is distracted, a teacher of unconditional love, when the world places so many conditions on love. There is no doubt that the story of Figo and Pope Francis left a permanent mark on the collective consciousness. What began as a chance encounter between a man and a stray dog transformed into a powerful living parable about compassion, connection, and the ability to find the divine in the simplest relationships. Today, 8 years after Figo's passing, his legacy lives on. Over 5,000 animal-assisted therapy programs operate in Catholic institutions around the world. The date of his birth, estimated by veterinarians, has become World Animal Compassion Day, celebrated by people of all faiths. At the spot where Figo was buried in the Vatican gardens, a simple bronze plaque contains only his name and the dates of his life, followed by a quote from Pope Francis's words on the day he nearly lost his life, but was saved by the presence of his furry friend. Sometimes miracles come with 4 paws and a tail that won't stop wagging. And in cathedrals, parishes, and chapels around the world, a new generation of the faithful learns that compassion has no limits, that love transcends species barriers, and that sometimes the deepest spiritual truths can be found not in complex theological treatises, but in the trusting gaze of an animal who loves without reservation or condition. Figo's legacy serves as a constant reminder that, in a world often divided by differences, there still exists a universal language that all hearts can understand. The language of unconditional love, demonstrated perfectly by a golden mixed-breed dog who won the heart of a pope, and through him, touched millions of souls around the planet.